Hello, welcome. My name is Quinn Zender, and this is Nest by Sugar Bytes. What is Nest? The short answer is Nest is a modular-style MIDI sequencer and plugin host. And the longer answer is Nest is what you could call a circuit-bending MIDI generator. It's like a MIDI sequencer laid out on a breadboard with all the integrated circuits and internal connections available to play with. It provides the typical functions of a sequencer, but on a modular circuit level. The inputs and outputs of real and imaginary ICs can be connected to create 8 voices of MIDI and 4 lanes of parameter automation. This MIDI can then be assigned to internal sound generators, external MIDI equipment, or VST2 plugins, which can be hosted directly within Nest itself. Of course, Nest itself is a plugin which you can use in your preferred DAW. Without further ado, let's take a first look at the interface. At its heart, Nest is quite simple. It is divided into 2 pages, the wire page and the sound page. The wire page is the main workspace where modules are connected and the MIDI of 8 voices is generated. You can think of each of these voices as being its own sequence. So, in Nest, we can have up to 8 of these sequences running in parallel. With the flexibility of Nest, each sequence or voice can have its own unique scale, timing, and sequence length, depending, of course, on how you patch it. At the top of the wire page is the preset menu, notepad, wire editor, and scene selector. Scenes are very powerful in Nest, allowing immediate recall of up to 12 different patching setups. Every wire, connection, and parameter value is included in these scenes. And of course, true to Sugar Bytes style, the scenes can be automated by MIDI notes. We will go into more detail on each of these functions later in the video. The sound page, accessible at the top right, is where 8 voices of MIDI are assigned to sound channels. There are 4 channels, each of which can be an internal sound engine, an assignable array of MIDI output channels, or a VST2 plugin. To assign MIDI voices to the sound channels, we use the voice activators. There are 8 voice activators for each sound channel. With these, you can distribute the voices across all of the channels as you wish. Each sound channel has a companion modulation section. Signals and connections on the wire page are turned into plugin automation or MIDI CC, program changes, and aftertouch messages. To activate the automation, we use the 4 mod activators. These function just like the voice activators. Again, we'll go into these functions later on in the video. So before getting into the modules and patching, there are a few basics I'd like to go over so that we can get the most out of Nest. If you'd like to skip directly to the modules or to a specific section, there are timestamps below and in the description for this video. Now, the first basic is data. Nest's signal type is numbers, not DC voltage. These numbers are passed along wires between its modules. The typical number ranges that we work with in Nest are between 0 and 127. As you can see, this is perfect for working with MIDI. Number 2 is that there are 2 signal types, analog and digital. An analog signal has a range from 0 to 127, while a digital signal is simply a 1 or a 0. As you may have guessed, analog values are used for pitch, velocity, and modulation, whereas digital values are used as triggers or gates. Number 3 is that Nest's modules on their own don't produce any sound. Nest is a modular sequencer, not a modular synthesizer, so all of the modules are optimized for generating pitch, gate, and modulation signals. Nest does, however, have built-in synthesizers, which are the targets for the data that we generate with the modules. And last is that mathematical addition is part of the main workflow. Any time that a wire is stacked at an input with another wire, the values of each wire are added. So, stacking a wire with a 10 and a wire with a 24 at an input results in a 34. This allows us to easily create melodies, arpeggios, and even more interesting modulation. With those basics out of the way, let's finally begin patching. Alright, in this first part, we're going to go over wiring a voice, and we're going to look at the clock module, the voice outputs, and the voice activators. Now, before we begin, let's open up a default template from the SugarBytes folder, and if you've already got a project with wires, you may click the X in the wire editor to remove all cables, and if you didn't want to destroy your entire project, the undo and redo buttons are your friend. Now, taking a first look at the voice output, every voice has a gate, velocity, and pitch input. In Nest, the only signal required to generate our MIDI note is the note on or the gate input. I'm going to connect my gate to a binary clock signal from the clock module and press play. Right now, a MIDI note with the value of 0 is being generated. I can manually adjust the pitch by sliding up on the pitch offset slider. And I can change the tempo by dragging the cable into a new clock output. Alright, I'm going to bring that back down to our 8. And now let's look at assigning this voice. When we go to the sound page, we can see that voice 8 is assigned to sound channel number 2. Unassigning that and assigning it to channel 1. Now, sound channel number 4 is unique. This is the dedicated drum channel. It only responds to voices 1, 2, and 3, which are hardwired to the kick, snare, and noise sounds. This is only for the built-in instrument. If you go into a plugin mode or MIDI mode for this channel, then it does respond to all 8 voice activators. Now I'm going to go back to drum mode and demonstrate very quickly those drum sounds. So these 3 inputs are activated. And let's take this here. Okay, and I'm going to just pause that and clear out everything with X in the wire editor. Now, we were already taking a look at voice number 8, and I want to talk about the velocity input now. Without anything connected to velocity, a MIDI note with full velocity is generated. Got to reassign that. Now, as soon as we connect a signal, the signal is 0, so it has no effect. When we bring that up to a 1, a MIDI note with the velocity value of 1 is generated. You can hear it is very quiet at the moment. And by removing this cable with a right click on the wire, the same full velocity is generated with no input signal. Okay, we've looked at the gate input and the velocity input. Let's now take a look at the pitch input. Double-clicking on any value or knob in Nest will reset it. So I'm going to bring that back down to 0. Click play. And now I'm going to take a number from somewhere else in Nest and apply that to the pitch input. I will use the constant knob, which is just a manual knob for any number value. Now we can use the pitch slider in conjunction to add to our value or to subtract from it. Now we're going to take the concepts we learned and apply them to make something slightly more interesting. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take voices 6, 7, and 8 and tune those to one chord. But before I do so, I'm going to get a kick drum playing by going into the sound page and activating that voice. Now I don't want to use voice channel 2, I want to use channel 3, which is a resonator synthesizer. Channels 1 and 2 are subtractive synths. Now I'm going to tune that chord. Oh, I've got a scale here. Let's just remove that momentarily. And let's hear how that sounds. Okay, not bad. The chord sounds good. Before I get started, I want to go back and give myself a C major scale so that all pitches stay in one key. Okay, so I'm going to remove these wires with the wire editor because I want to use a different binary clock source or gate source. Now, anytime you see a flashing LED, this indicates that the module and the output outputs a binary signal. The binary signals are, of course, zeros and ones. So these oscillators down here output binary signals, the triggers, the logic, the digital shift register. All of these output zeros and ones. So I'm going to take the Geiger oscillator, which outputs a random synced trigger with the value indicated right here, and the second one. And now I would like to transpose this chord, so I will take numbers from the constant knob and send those to each voice. And now when I give a number, the chord is transposed as 1. Can I make this any more interesting? Yes, I can. So these binary signals output zeros and ones. Those can also be applied to pitch inputs. So I will take my first Geiger oscillator and bring that to the pitch of voice 8. And let's go back to the sound page. We can reassign these voices anywhere we wish. liked when they were all on the resonator. Now let's take a look at the scale modules. Scales are simple but powerful in Nest. They basically turn chaos into order and keep your entire project in tune. Now, as we know, we have 8 output modules. Each output has got its own individual scale. This acts like a quantizer, filtering out any unwanted notes for that voice. Now, if I trigger voice 8, we can see it has currently got all notes enabled. When I scroll through the pitch, every note can be triggered. But if I were to filter out any unwanted sharps, when I scroll through the pitches, all notes are in key. Demonstrating this further by filtering out everything but the C. C and G. And a triad. Okay, you may have noticed a button called All right here. This is a toggle which takes the current selected scale, the current voice, and applies it to all voices. So with all toggled on, the 8th scale will be applied to voices 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1, with 7 currently toggled and all on. Then this C major scale will be applied to all voices. I think the easiest way to demonstrate that would be with a random sequence, so give me a moment to patch that up. And let's get some backbone. Okay, so what I'm going to do is scroll through the different scales with all enabled. So this scale is a minor pentatonic scale. This is major pentatonic. These are just some intervals. And this is going to sound bad because it is all notes at random. And let's go back to something nice sounding. Okay, now if I turn off all, then voice 8 is receiving its scale, which currently is nonsense. And voice 7 is receiving its scale. So with all toggled on, all voices are in sync with this scale. Okay, let's look at the offset slider now. So I'm going to just pause this. Now what offset does is it takes the current scale and it offsets it by semitones from any number source in Nest. I think the best way to demonstrate that function is with a chord. Okay, I'm going to trigger these in sync. And what is my scale? It is C major being applied to all voices. Now, when I offset this, it's going to take this C major triad and shift it up one semitone to C sharp and 2 semitones. As you can probably hear, this is chromatic movement. It is just shifting the scale up by an offset of this specific number. If we want to offset our notes and keep them in key, we will press the scale button. This will offset the notes to the closest scale degree that is currently in scale. So listen to the difference that makes. Everything is in key. When I turn this off, we get chromatic movement. And with it turned back on, everything is nicely in key with itself. Let's try that with our pentatonic scale. With the main functions out of the way, let's begin digging into the modules. Now the first modules we'll take a look at are the counters. Nest has 2 counters, and their function is to count up to and down from the value indicated by this wrap number. Now these up and down inputs take valued triggers. As we know, a trigger typically has a value of, let me get my scale set up, has a value of 0 and 1. Now we can change the value of a trigger by multiplying it using some of our math functions. In this case, I will multiply the value by 2. Now I have a trigger with a value of 2, a value of 10, and a value of 80. There is a second way to create a valued trigger, and I prefer this method for smaller values. That is to drag out 1, 2, and any number of wires from the same port. Now I've dragged out 3 wires, so their values are added to create a trigger value of 3. I find this very useful to save on math modules, especially if I'm only using 3 or 4 cables. Now let's take a listen to this counter. I will have my maximum value be 12, send this to the pitch, and this to the gate. Now for every trigger the counter receives, it will count up by 1 semitone in the case of our pitch. If I were to drag out a second cable, I'm now counting up by 2s. With a trigger value of 3, I'm counting up 3, 6, 9, 12. And let's remove these and count down. Okay, the reset input does exactly what you think it would do. It just resets. Let's reset a little slower. Alright, now because these counters have a range of 0 to 127, they are excellent for creating melodies, arpeggios, velocity ramps, and can even be used with comparison functions and dividing clock signals. So what I'm going to do is demonstrate this now on a velocity ramp. So I will delete this cable and patch into our hi-hat. And I'll take a very fast signal from our pulse oscillator and apply that to the velocity input. And we can also count down. Okay, so now I would like to demonstrate using the counters to create melodies. So if I create an up value of, let's say, 3 or 4, and increase our maximum to something around here, let's see what this sounds like. We should probably have a nicer scale. Now let's try resetting that. And counting down at the same time.